We're going to talk about the overall philosophy of Fuse and kind of the different aspects that make up what we have decided is the beginning curriculum of how we start things at Fuse. And obviously we add in a lot of other curriculums, but these to me are the pieces that I want everyone to appreciate. I want parents to appreciate. I want them to understand how we believe we should start things at Fuse. And how does typical development start is really through a shared experience. And you think about little babies, somehow you're at the grocery store and you're like mesmerized by the little baby in the grocery cart thing because they almost have like a magnetizing effect of getting you to look at them, and they smile, and that's your shared experience. And what I think is really important is the process, not the product. And what I think happens so very often is parents will get a diagnosis and they will hear that their child is socially challenged, and they go for output rather than the process. And there's a lot of times it comes with a language delay and other delays, so they just start pulling and getting their child to do things. And if a child completes a task, it means they must be making progress. But what they're missing is that shared enjoyment and the shared experience, and getting a child to focus in on a person rather than on a task or on a product. So how does that start in all relationships? And we talked about it a ton yesterday with the parent communication, is really by trust. And you have to gain first the parent-child trust, and then obviously as a child goes to school, they're going to gain trust with their teachers. And one of the most important things, and I say it every year, is wipe out the academics at the beginning of the year, wipe out any goals, and just become attuned with the child. And if this were about a parent talk, that's what I say to the parents, is just become connected to your child. Because if the child doesn't trust you and they think you're always looking to gain something from them, they're going to be much less excited and much less motivated to want to connect with you. If I thought every time, like let's talk about a parent and a child. If the child thinks every time they get in the car at pickup, the parent is going to ask them 15 questions, that child is going to shut down 4 minutes before they get in the car, or as they're walking to the car, because it's not fun to always have to be pulling something out of to always have to have something that you have to give and something you have to attain. So what do we want to do as teachers is really gain the trust with the child and allow them to feel confident and successful at whatever their baseline is, so that over time we can build up. But if we go for higher than the baseline, then we're asking for more than they can do at that time. So we need to stay at the level of confidence. So kind of how do we build that shared enjoyment and the shared experience once we've gained the trust is really through problem solving. And when I say and I say it to parents, I could say to you, we are not teaching social skills, because you cannot teach social skills until you teach a child to problem solve. If you're teaching a skill, you're prompting the skill and you're building their skill acquisition rather than their understanding and ability to problem solve it, and an ability to adapt their actions according to any situation they're in. And that's really important. That's the goal, really, for all of our kids, is to be able to adapt to different situations. Because actually, one of my colleagues in India was talking about a study she did on high schoolers, and they were trying to teach social initiative or something, this was a study she was actually saying was the wrong way to do it. So it wasn't her that did it, but she was talking about how they were trying to teach social initiative. So they were teaching these kids in this study how to say hi. So they taught them all this, what they thought was like a loose social story of how to say hi. So, but the kids learned the script. And so it didn't matter where they were or what they did, they would say, hi, my name is so-and-so. And so if they were in the library, they did it at the same volume, because they didn't talk about in the social story what the volume was. If they were in the cafeteria, They did it at the same volume, but the kid couldn't hear them. And it was a group of kids, they didn't really assess the situation. And it was a group of kids that really, they shouldn't have been, it was like the football guys rather than the guys that were maybe talking about like games on the phone or whatever. Like you have to assess the situation and figure out what to do with it. And so, and then there was this other study where they put kids in a room and the teacher started talking, and it was a room of like Asperger's, high functioning kids on the spectrum that had cognitive ability, had language, everything. They put these kids in a room, and then the teacher was like, oh, I forgot something, I'm gonna leave for a little bit. And the teacher walked out of the room, and what do you predict the kids did? Nothing. They sat there and stared at the wall because they weren't prompted that you can be silly now or you can start talking. And so they stared at the wall, and the teacher was gone, and they kept saying, let's give them another minute, let's give them another minute. She came back like 7-8 minutes later, and the kids hadn't done anything because they didn't problem solve that. Yes, you were supposed to be quiet when the teacher was teaching, but now the teacher has left. You can adapt your actions and you can problem solve what you need to do in that situation. So it was kind of this like great thing, because that person did the talk on all the wrong thing about social skills. And then I did my talk on, it's not about social skills, it's about teaching them the problem solving, teaching them all the beginning layers of how to adapt in a social situation, how to adapt your actions, how to adapt your communication, all of that in a social situation, so that you can become a flexible thinker and you can think dynamically about what happens in that situation. So what happens for kids on the spectrum is they have almost an underconnectivity between the information they take in, how they make meaning of it, and the output of information. So what we're trying to build is that connectivity. We're trying to build their ability to take in information, make sense of it, and output a problem-solving reasoning. So when the teacher leaves the room, they notice, oh, wait, things have changed. So it's not their rigid thinking of what they were supposed to do when there was a rule, but they shifted into a more dynamic thinking of, oh, things have changed. I'm going to change the way I'm acting. And they're making meaning of that moment rather than sticking with their rigid way of thinking. So we back it up to preschool and we teach that, because by the time they're in high school, they already have so many rules and so much rigidity because things haven't worked in the past. So it's like the beauty of getting these kids so little, when we can teach them that problem solving and we can teach them that dynamic thinking of when a situation changes, you notice, you adapt, and you work within that situation. And the whole way you create problem solving is to create dynamic thinkers and to help kids understand the world and the way you problem solve a world. Any of our kids would do amazing if we prompted them. If we said to Elias, go stand in a line, he would stand in a line, but when someone bumped him, we didn't give him a rule on that. So then we might say don't hit, but sometimes his reaction is going to be quicker than the rule we created. So we taught him problem solving, and between Megan, Casey, Harper, like piping in his ear, he learned to problem solve and like communicate in that moment. It's still a work in progress, but it's teaching them how to adapt in those moments. And then you have to take into account all the areas of challenge for that situation. Like, yes, we can teach them to problem solve, we can teach them to understand their body in relation to others, but we have to take into account the incredible challenges that these kids have. And this is why when we were talking about yesterday, parent communication, we can only be at the spot the kid is at, and the challenge is to get a child to school. The challenge is to make sure that that child is at school and in a good place. Parents have to incorporate all these different areas of challenge. We as teachers have to think about all these areas of challenge and how they affect every single moment. And it's really our job to adapt, scaffold, and accommodate every activity, whether it's walking in the hall, doing an academic lesson, or doing a social lesson, of what the kids need to accommodate all their different challenges. And all these like pieces of the pie are gonna look different for different kids. For some kids, the sensory slice is gonna be way bigger. For some kids, the language slice is gonna be way bigger. So depending on what their challenges are gonna be what the tools we use during the day. So if the sensory pie piece is large, then their toolbox is gonna be huge. If the language pie piece is large, then we're gonna bring in so many visuals so that we're not taxing everything at one time, because that's when we get the shutdown or the behaviors, is when we're trying to tax all these areas at the same time. So we just wanna continuously think about all the areas of challenge as we start to initiate social development and emotional development. And this is just like my non-tech stair-step approach of how we start and what we want to get to. And this is like just the very beginning of how we build from the simplest of the nonverbals, because if you think about shared experience and getting the process, it goes back to before kids have language, and it goes back to the nonverbal communication and getting kids to move together. And then from there, we just slowly add little pieces of, we move with variations. Then we add a little collaboration. We add a little more of the communication in. And I think what was the most interesting, for you guys, most of you have been here and you drink the juice of like not using a lot of language. But I think what was the most poignant for like when I did this talk abroad is how little language was used with everything. So I think the biggest piece that how we appreciate working with kids and how different it is in other places is language is used to gain like almost initiative and skills from other people. But when you think of social interaction, so much of it comes from nonverbal communication. And there's actually studies on like broadband communication, holistic communication, and the statistics aren't in here, but 80% of communication that adults would have or kids would have with each other is more of the nonverbal range, and 20% is actually used with expressive language or more like back and forth verbal language. So if we think about 80% of language is nonverbal, and our kids notoriously, nonverbal communication is so very difficult because it takes so much dynamic thinking. Life is very difficult for these kids, even kids on the spectrum that have higher, I mean, kids on the like higher end of the spectrum that have higher language. What flubs them up in life, and there's like a lot of studies I used to show a grid on where when they get to adulthood, they have a really hard time holding a job, have a really hard time holding relationships. All of that is from two elements: dynamic thinking and understanding communication back and forth. And you can hold a relationship for a little bit because you can ask a girl out. You can do that all through simple black and white communication. But once you start having to actually get into the relationship and reading the cues and dynamically thinking about how your action is going to affect the other person's actions, it falls apart. So what we want to do is go back to the super basics and teach our kids the nonverbal, you just came right on time. Communication. Yes. We're starting with like philosophy and few stuff, and then we're going to get into the lesson planning stuff. So we were talking about the importance of nonverbal communication, and I always show the slide so people that have been around forever are sick of it, but I think it's so important to talk about how early nonverbal communication starts. This was a study on depth perception, but there was a parent on one side, there was a baby, a toddler, like 9-10-month-old on the other side. They were looking to see if the child would see the perceived cliff, but what ended up happening is when they looked towards the parent, if the parent gave a soothing face, they would stop and revert back. If the parent gave a soothing face, they would crawl to the parent. If the parent gave a concerned, disconcerted face, they would revert back. So it shows how very, very early on, kids or babies start to have a whole back and forth communication, and they understand that what the parent is communicating, and they adapt their actions accordingly. So in typical development, that really starts at the 9 or 10 month level, and they build from there, and then they gain expressive language. And so the expressive language is layered in with all this 80% of nonverbal communication. What happens for our kids, if you think of the pieces of the challenging pie, all these other things start confounding, being able to notice and adapt. And then we start deciding they have language delays, and so we start pumping language, and we miss a little bit of their ability to read the cues before they have to start talking about the cues. So this is a video of Megan has set out like frogs, and she's trying to get the little boy to look at her and find the frogs and put them on the, I don't know, so I think that's the activity is. Put the frogs on the lily pad. So the important part is watching how he is looking at Megan and how Megan is using her eyes. And this is like, there's all these derivations of referencing, and this is really referencing for information. He has to find the frog and put it on.
And I need you to say a froggy from this lily pad.
So that shows just the simplest part. And you would start much smaller right next to you, and then you would build out. But notice that he's on a scooter board because motor planning, not his forte. So you're, again, not taxing different pieces of the pie at the same time. We're really highlighting, this is like when we talk about lesson planning, zoom in on things, and there are times when you zoom out, but when our zoom in highlight at that moment is getting him to watch Megan's face, we need to zoom in on that and not tax him on it. She actually made him run. He might get totally distracted and go somewhere else, but being grounded on the scooter board actually gets him in a more grounded place. The next video is both Addie and Adam, and now we're referencing for approval, disapproval. So we're moving from like just the straight, I'm gonna look at something and you're gonna find it, to getting them to understand when she gives a smile or a frown. So it's like Mother May I with nonverbals. Aren't you gonna miss So, and I guess the biggest piece to me, and this is obviously obvious to all of you, is making it fun, because it's about the process. It's not about the product. If Megan wouldn't have made it fun, they're not gonna internalize it. The whole point is to get them to be addicted to the social interaction. And when it's fun, they're looking at Megan, they're noticing Megan, they're adapting their actions. And I mean, that's for them like an amazing activity, because Addie at the beginning of the year would run down the hall and not even like look back, and Kristen's running after him. So the fact that he's regulating his body with a friend and noticing and adapting, but it's fun. So it's, my whole goal is it's about the process. If she would have done that in a very discreet, not fun way, it wouldn't have been the same end goal of now they don't see faces as confusing. They see faces as a means of communication. This next activity is Maggie doing it's like, I don't even know what the thing was. It was like a travel unit, and they were making suitcases. But again, the suitcase was the background material that they were making, because they were making them for this unit. But the foreground, what we're zooming in on, is the nonverbal communication that's happening to make this amazing suitcase. And I just happened to walk in and notice and grabbed my phone, because it was like this beautiful moment of watching a bunch of first graders problem solving and noticing what was happening, and
show how to make
just watch.
it.
It's as much about watching Maggie with the nonverbals, which was amazing, as watching the kids like figure this out.
You have to look to learn. Okay, here we go. If you're looking, you'll learn how to make a suitcase. Ooh.
seen these videos, right? Have we watched it? I've seen it, like,
Ooh, yellow. Whoa, this paper is longer than I expected.
And they're making nice declarative comments because that's what Maggie modeled, which is so great.
I did it.
The reason Lauren's not in there is I was interviewing this girl, which is the whole reason I was in there. So X, the other adult that's in this video, out.
Open it.
So cute.
Keep going.
One white and one brown.
So this is where scaffolding becomes so important because Maggie, I assume, purposely did not get the glue out to make this moment happen. That's what I tell everyone.
Yes, I did that.
And that you purposely didn't have enough glue sticks for everyone. I tell everyone that was thought ahead as well.
That part, I don't think was
Well, it worked out
They
beautifully.
just crushed the glue sticks.
Got it. Glue. Glue together. Glue together.
Aww.
Come on. And that referencing right there was awesome. Where she's like, I need to just look for it, I'm not gonna ask.
Yes. Because they're modeling, Maggie's not talking, so we're gonna not talk and we're gonna reference.
Not gross.
That was actually amazing. Morris would never say, "Can I have your glue stick?"
It's like you set this up for me. And remember, Elizabeth Deutsch was standing right here waiting for him, and I was like, "Back off."
That's also amazing that he would do that while she was there.
Yes, there was the interviewee next to him, who actually did a good job. I don't even remember what happened to her, but she actually did a good job of like modeling after you. But then Elizabeth Deutsch was about to go and grab him, and I was like, stop.
Back off.
And because it was such a great moment that was happening. But I mean, I could watch those, I have watched them a whole lot of times. There's like so many amazing moments. The kids are working together as a group. I even thought it was like amazing. Carmelina went to get the glue sticks, Morris ran after her, and I don't know, he just looked and was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gone. Like he kind of problem solved, I should go back to my chair. So there's just so many moments of, it's a teachable suitcase that could have been an art project that was done in half a second, but it turned, and this was only 2 segments of this suitcase, but the amount of problem solving that was incorporated into it and getting them to read nonverbals. And what I feel like is so important and why I just wish parents could, I know you don't wish this, but that they could sit behind the one-way mirrors to see is they think using language elicits language, and I don't want to say it the wrong way, Brooke, but these kids use language without you using language. Like Ryan said, like, oh, it's longer than I thought, like a totally spontaneous comment. Because if Maggie would have been focused on the color of the construction paper and all these like things, the product of the activity, the kids would have been focused on that rather than sharing the process together. I know we have to facilitate the language, but this is like, there was a lot of communication happening without focusing on the language.
It's pretty cool to see, especially Morris and Siobhan, because
Yes.
if you prompted them verbally to do, like, for Siobhan to pick one, for Morris to say like, what do? You don't have a glue stick. They would have been totally zoned out or not processing any
Totally.
language and wouldn't have done it. You know what I mean?
And that's what I feel like I wish parents could see that piece is when mom says, what do you want to eat? What do you want to eat?
Yeah.
And they don't pick something, they need it done in a way that's going to allow them a process. And Sivan picked pretty quickly, like,
I know.
and she modeled exactly your way. You said ooh, whatever, and she said ooh, orange. With the intonation, like
That's
it's
like,
just
that's really amazing for her.
yes,
Really cool.
and it was flexible, and she didn't get stuck on it. And so, anyways, we could do a whole 3-hour talk on communication, but we will move on. So this is just like when we think about imperative communication, prompting communication versus declarative communication, we're going to get a lot more out of declaring the color that Maggie picked than saying, Sivan, pick orange, because then she's just, no, I want yellow or whatever. Like if you decree it, it's going to be a rigid way of thinking. If you declare it, hopefully over time, and this was like in spring sometime, you're going to get more hopefully flexible thinking. So the next thing after you start noticing, and nonverbal, the referencing is really just about noticing what's happening, noticing and adapting your actions. You move into more of regulating and moving, and the goal is that kids learn to dance with each other. But what our initial step is just getting them to co-regulate with each other. And I know most people have heard, I did my dissertation on, I was very curious way back in the day when I was doing my dissertation on why so many kids were getting diagnosed like like 4s to 5s and why not earlier. And when you look at like red flags that parents would bring in to their pediatrician or whatever, it was all about like standing on the periphery of the playground, not being able to be in the group in the kindergarten class, and teachers would red flag it, parents would just, but this was like 20 years ago. And what that shows is that the regulation, the being able to co-regulate and be in the amoeba with the group is when at that time really became a red flag. So if you look at typical development, by 24 months of age, kids are able to regulate their actions with an adult, typically developing kids. So parents can let the hand go, and kids can walk, and they can stop and walk in very simplistic ways when there's not a lot of distractions. By 36 months of age, so 2.5, they're able to do that with peers, which is why we like evolve into parallel play, that you can start and stop like stirring together, you can bang and start and stop, and it's very parallel. By 48 months of age, kids are able to co-regulate in a variable way with other peers. But think about how much dynamic information processing that takes. Think about it like if you're running with a friend or if you're walking with a friend. You're not thinking about it, but your brain is constantly in that gray area thinking of like, should I go slower, should I go faster? I need to stay with my friends, so I need to base my actions off of my friends' actions. These kids are static thinkers, and they haven't yet been here and learned their problem solving. So when they see a bug, they're not going to look back and get the other kid moving. They're thinking, I'm going to go towards the bug and see the bug, and then they look around and they've lost their friend because they don't have that ability to stay connected and either walk as slow or tell the peer to move with them. So we have to teach them that whole parallel synchronicity in movement and then add more variations to it. So the way we start is getting them to hold things, because if we said, okay, carry magnet tiles down the hall, but stay together. There's no way we could get those two kids moving together because they're both not yet perspective takers. So they're both thinking about what they're doing. They may notice each other, but they don't know how to adapt their actions. So if we ask them to carry it together, they have to think about each other and they have to adapt their movement, which is like a whole nother system of like brain-body connection to adapt their actions to what their friend is doing.
Ready? Again, whoa!
And they're actually doing it. And when something falls, that's their prompt. Megan doesn't even need to prompt them.
He had just been in a wedding. He's
Oh, that's right. So, I should preface this. So this is cute little koalas. And these are 3, maybe not even 3 at this point. And it was just highlighting. So like my point to show it to parents or professionals is just highlighting when it comes together. You don't have to prompt them. Like Jen is so good in this video and in life of you don't prompt them to make them do it, because then it's about the product. But just get them moving in the direction, and then when they do it, it's like this beautiful moment that they are doing it together. So they're still regulating with each other right now. They have like a back and forth going.
The sweet motion.
Oh, it looks like they're rolling jack.
Oh, Will's gonna join? They could use your help, Will. Oh, I heard Cassie say help, Will.
Ask him again.
Oh, here he comes. The whole group is working together. Oh, Will wants to get
That's what we should move on to the next video. So it's just about like getting them to work together. And again, for those little kids, like the pressure of pushing the thing makes them feel confident with it. But it's really just they're so happy and they're working together. And again, there's scaffolding in there because they're in the sensory room. It's a space. And I mean, I don't know how you set it up, but it's more like, oh, let's just push the tube. And then slowly Jen kind of just guides them into all working together, and Will wasn't doing it, which was kind of his MO in the beginning, but she just kind of invites him to do it. If we would say everybody push, then they're not initiating the motivation on their own. And it really is about getting them to understand that it's fun to do the dance over just decreeing to do the dance. This is just super cute, getting them to work together.
Get a beat. Clap your hands on your knees, stretch side to side, arms up and down, and round and right. Legs up on the line, legs down, bottom up. Whoa, bottom down. Clap your hands on your knees, stretch side to.
It's just cuteness. So anyways, that is just about it's just so cute to watch them work together. And I mean, I'm sure they weren't doing that from the beginning perfectly, but they're watching each other. They're watching Jen, but they're watching each other. And when Lewis wasn't doing it, it wasn't a decree, but it was like, oh, hope you join the group. And he joins, like it's getting
together
kind of
through the whole.
So this is our famous triplets. And I mean, what you guys saw, well, we only had 2 this summer, but these 3, when we started with them, were 3, like, I don't know.
Tornadoes?
Yes, just like just shooting in different directions. So way back, we were just starting to get them to like stay together, notice what was happening. This was like November-ish, because I use this for the Harvard conference. But anyways, it was just getting them to notice each other and be in like a synchronized action with each other.
Together through the whole course.
Ready, jump, step, 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 stop, go, nice, go.
Wow, I like how you guys are using teamwork. Amazing.
So this is like how you add, when you start to add little variations, and at the beginning of the school year, I would urge you to just keep it slow and keep it simple, because if you add variations too quick, the kids are gonna fail at it. So it's about how do you wanna get from point A to point B in the simplest, most successful way for the kids. If you ask them to walk down the hall as a group, it's gonna fail. But if you ask them maybe to hold something with a friend or hold a hula hoop and just walk, this is like next level up of trying. I mean, these boys were on overdrive 100% of the time. So we were trying to get them to slow down. And if I just said be a boat in the hallway on their own, it would have been a fail because they can't control their bodies. But the hula hoop was like a great scaffolding mechanism, because when one was going faster than the other, it would like stretch the hula hoop.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream.
So this is the same type of activity with these three little guys, doing like just rolling Play-Doh. You spent a long time just working on like slow fast with them, right? Like it was.
Riley?
This is a cool activity. Someone was talking about it yesterday, with the swimming pool thing.
Good advice.
But it's getting them to like regulate their bodies.
Wow,
with
you
each other.
guys are doing a great job.
You guys can do fast. I'm gonna count.
Fast together.
This is 20 seconds. Ready, set, go. 3, 2, 1. Good work.
So that's just, you start working on like simple co-regulations, simple variations, and what you want to be building at the same time, and kind of after they're noticing each other, is how you're going to connect kids together. So you want to build that regulation, and then you want to start getting them to dance with each other. So the way you really get them to dance with each other is almost setting them up for a dance with each other. So this next little video is our little friend Aria, and I was working with his parents on trying to help him remain engaged in the interaction. And a lot of, we talk a lot about patterning and getting kids to understand the pattern within play. So you're working on that with these kids to get them connected with another kid. First, they have to learn to notice the child. They have to learn to kind of move with the child, but then they have to learn to how to stay connected and how to learn to dance to different beats, basically. So this next video is Aria's parents holding, all we were doing, the pattern was Aria was getting something, or the mom was handing it to Aria and Aria was giving it to dad, or vice versa, whatever. But it's just the pattern of, I'm gonna hand you something and you're gonna put it in. And it's helping him connect. And the biggest thing I say to his parents in this video and to teachers is, you become the unpredictable one. And that's a very hard concept for parents to understand, because they're so used to running after their child or them modulating their child rather than their child modulating to them. That's a big piece for us as teachers. We are modulating, the kids in our class are modulating to us and regulating to us. So we become unpredictable. And you'll see in this video where the mom who's holding the bin, I'm asking her to move around, because if she stayed solid, Aria's gonna zone out, because it's already like a routinized thing in his head. If she becomes unpredictable, he has to look around and problem solve where she is at that. She has to look at where the mom is at that time.
I got one here.
And I put them in my office because Aria gets so distracted. They need to be in a very small space.
Oh, mommy.
And my biggest thing with it was not using a lot of language, because they were focused on the colors of the cube, how many there was.
Are you? Oh, I see one.
And giving him time to process it.
Blank.
Dad could have given him even more time to process it. I mean, he's little here. He's like, I don't know, it's at the beginning of the year.
Curve. Curve. Blank. Curve. Blank.
So see how he went because he thought mom was over here, but he looked, turned his body around? That's like the problem solving. We want him to be aware and notice. Oh, so this next video is our little friends Danny and Gael, so many love. So this is my example of when you don't set up a pattern, what happens, versus when you do set up a pattern of how we build success. So this is Danny and Gael in my office, and they have the same materials out, but I have set up nothing, and how they are playing, but they are completely disconnected from each other. And these kids know each other incredibly well. So that's, I mean, that could go on forever. So then I set up a super simple pattern because their language is not great, but it's varied between the two of them. I set up a pattern of, I forget which one, but one puts the cube in the truck and it's like a delivery. So one puts it in and one's supposed to deliver it to the farm, but they end up crashing it in the farm. But the point is about how you set up a really simple pattern, they understand the pattern, they feel confident, and then you can add variations to the pattern. But the pattern creates
Okay, more food for the farmhouse. Nice.
So I set up this little chant of food to the farmhouse.
Hey, oh, delivery.
And they're able to actually, like, Danny waits for Gael to put the cube in.
Oh, delivery. Oh no. More food. Oh no. It's a delivery. Oh no. Oh, delivery. You guys are a good team. Oh, delivery.
So they can just, because now they have a pattern and they're connected. And my biggest thing is, yes.
Sorry. I just have a question. And I watch Megan do this and I always think like, oh, like setting it up.
Yes.
The language or not language that you use, visuals, what do you remember what you did for that, for those two guys? Like I'll watch Megan in social groups or when we do group games and Megan always sets things up so like clearly.
Megan's better at the whiteboard visuals than I, like with those two kids,
Yeah, like,
I did it, I just modeled it.
I was
And
gonna say, did you just model?
I model, they don't have a lot of language and their attention is very short. So I just modeled for them, like I put it in the truck and I kind of, I did both jobs.
Yeah.
This is two kids, like I think if it's, like this next, well, this probably you didn't do visuals for, but I think if you're trying to, like when I watched Megan do her recycle plan, she had visuals for every single like role.
Yeah,
So
it
each
depends
role
on
had a
how
visual.
far you're into it too.
Yes.
Like, do you want is the point of them to problem solve yet, or is the point of them to just learn their roles so that later you can set them up for like problem solving and engagement?
I think if you're just doing, like-
too muddled in like the how to explain it or set it up.
Yeah, I think if you're just doing morning choice and you're trying to get two kids to, like if you're playing with, not the food speeds, but those like water bead things, you could just be like, oh, you have the funnel, you have the scooper, scoop, dump,
Yeah.
scoop, dump, like,
Alright.
just give them a mantra. Like, to them, the words we said of like, food in the farmhouse, that was their pattern. And that helped them remember their jobs, like you heard Gael just say it over and over again, because that helped them understand what they were doing. If I would have put too much into the setup, I would have lost, especially those two, I would have for sure lost it. So before I took the video, we had modeled it, and I would be like, oh, Danny, where's the food? And he would drive the car back to get the food. So it's more about taking everything out. I feel like taking the distractions out and setting up a really simple pattern. Like this next one is, whoever it is, Billy getting a blue block, and the whole setup is one's a deliverer and one's a builder. And I don't, how much do you set that up?
I don't even remember this video.
Well, here, let's play it.
It goes right here.
Well, X that part out, but,
Oh, this was a super dysregulated.
yeah, but the clip I took
Looks like
was
Dylan's
good.
ready.
So Dylan, so he pulls it back.
2 more pieces.
And all I wanted to highlight was there is a
2 more
deliverer
pieces.
and a builder.
We have robot and
And my point of the video when I showed,
Right.
I was like, this was the day we tried everything,
I mean,
and it felt like everything did not work.
Dylan,
But it
one more
is.
piece.
Yeah.
he's handing him over.
He delivered it.
Yes, and Billy's taking it.
And Billy did a great job waiting. He could have been like,
He did.
damn.
Yeah.
Billy could just run and go get one if he
Yeah.
wants.
I mean,
So that's my point, is they're
I don't know,
sticking with their
that
role.
was a day. Yeah.
And then in a second, you switch them.
You're okay, we're doing something beautiful.
See, it's shining on my
Oh, they
But look, you don't, no, actually, I think it's
You
great.
were there sweating.
I was gonna say, Billy.
We don't know that.
Billy makes me sweat.
But this.
All right, are you guys ready to switch jobs? Okay, Billy, or Dylan, you're the builder now,
And then switch.
and Billy, you're the
I will
passer.
say, there is a pipeline.
Dylan has fallen 12 times.
At least.
So the point of it is that it could have, in your head, not gone well, but if you would have tried to hone in and make it go, like, behaviorally come down, like, Billy, why'd you throw that? You need to bring it back, whatever, you would have lost the moment. And they actually, if your goal was patterning and sticking with their roles, they did do it. And when Dylan came over here, you were like, oh, I don't know what that is, okay. And he just went back, like, so even in the moment it didn't feel
Yeah.
great, it actually looks good. This is like also,
One,
super simple pattern of they need to clean up the balls, because
2,
class is about to come in, but one person
3.
is the dumper and one person is the deliverer. And again, it's all about learning the
4,
dance, because could he
5,
go and
6, quick.
Could he go and grab all the
7.
balls? Yes, but they're trying to stay in the pattern, and so the next video is to show how it evolves into a whole group activity.
Sounds good.
You're a tosser.
Good job, guys.
all the small.
So see how like patient he's waiting for, I mean, it's like all about
Dylan's
just
ready, he's waiting.
understanding the pattern. Oh, so this is, I mean, we can watch these videos forever, but this is now, we've added in the communication, because this is a little bit later in the year, and they're working on communicating with each other. Working,
One person's a passer, one person's a builder.
right,
They're
it's,
building a train.
right, so what in this, you'll notice, John gives a little advice, or you help him give advice, just,
The little ones goes in the middle too. That's big. The ones go on the right and now.
Oh, this is the one, yeah.
No, you're not picking the pieces.
so that my whole point was to, for that moment of like, John understood what the roles were. and he was regulating the activities.
Oh, yeah, the crane was delivering
It's
the
coming.
pieces
This is
to
the
Cuba.
Oh, yeah. So this is the
One at a
building like
time.
a Zika Bridge.
See you go, Cuba.
And now there's 3 working in the pattern.
Zika Bridge down. Zika Bridge down.
It really is a big person.
Of course, I did.
Maddie, if you notice something, you could tell Kuba.
So it's also just about using the declarative communication, because Maddie is trying to figure it out, but if you would have given him the language, he wouldn't have figured it out. So he's waiting for you to fix it right now, but it's great that you do not.
We're gonna build another level, guys, so we might have to.
Well, John saw you something about what you guys are making.
We are not building another level yet. We're not making another level yet. I didn't get one to John.
Oh, Billy, we ran out?
Make anything but not on.
What else can you use, Billy, that's the same size?
How about these?
Let's try it.
How about you put that piece right here? And do you know what? This. How about we put one more on?
So
We're not making another.
The whole revolution of like,
Really, I
you
think that's
start
great.
simplistically without language, and now they're using comments like, how about this, how about that? Because it hasn't been
So
prompted into them, and they're using problem-solving language, which is how, if you evolve it from the bottom up, it turns into very collaborative language.
Yeah, they did like a pattern to make all
So I
of
noticed it
that.
looks different than what John and Billy are
And I
doing.
didn't
I wonder if they
really
expect
take
it to look
That's
different.
why
Right.
they take the end, so now they're like running out of blocks and they're trying to
Right,
figure
but
out.
that's like,
Yeah.
right, so it goes from like the simple pattern to
I
like
think
problem
it's
solving.
one.
This was like the smartest thing, Billy.
I was gonna say, I am
really
so impressed
Really,
with
that
Billy
really
right now.
But Cooper knocked it down and he said this can be a bridge, so that's
Oh,
why.
tell him what you're expecting it to look like.
I'm expecting it to not.
Well, look at this. Remember you built level one?
Not my goal.
Oh, we,
Cooper just, he's
That's
like the honey
so-
badger. He
Anyways,
just
then we
does-
go into like, and then we really start working on, the social thinking, feelings, thoughts, and, so we can stop for now, because it's more, this is more, like next steps, and we can go little piece by little piece. But anyways, first of all, I love the videos, and I think they're fun, but, questions you guys have on, questions you guys have on any of that?